For so long in my Christian journey, I thought that the only thing that mattered was the afterlife. There's an old fable called The Angel with the Torch and Pail. The angel was walking down the streets of the world carrying a torch in one hand and a pail of water in the other. A person asked the angel, "What are you doing with that torch and pail?" And the angel said, "With the torch, I'm burning down the mansions of heaven, and with the pail, I'm extinguishing the fires of hell. Then, and only then, will we see who truly loves God." Operating with love as the source, not fear of punishment or even promise of reward, is a radically different Christian paradigm. I'm so grateful to be a part of a church where life is a gift and love is the point. A church that is centered in on Jesus and his desire to bring heaven here. A church where everyone is invited to the party. A church for the rebellious and a church for the religious. Thank you for being the best church ever. I'm so grateful for you. Everything we offer as a church is made possible through your support and participation. As we near the end of 2024, we pause and ask for your financial support. If you have been impacted by Prodigal Church, would you consider a year-end gift? It is the gifts from people like you that allows us to make a difference locally and globally. Thanks for helping us love God and love people. When I was a child, I was Peace Boy. Peace Boy was a hero that was invented by my twin brother and my older sister. If you grew up having siblings that were close to your age, then you know a thing or two about fighting. My brother and sister and I would often squabble or fight. Okay, not fist fight, but close to it sometimes. And whenever one of these scuffles took place, when mom or dad found out or got involved, there were big consequences. And we all feared the consequences. And so when my brother and sister were having an argument and I saw it escalating, Peace Boy showed up on the scene. And I would just insert myself between them and say the words Peace Boy over and over again. Peace Boy, Peace Boy, Peace Boy, Peace Boy. And look at both of them. And then through the ridiculousness of it all, it would often, not always, disarm the conflict and we were spared from my parents' wrath. Now, I realize that as in my retelling of this, I'm the innocent one trying to bring peace. And I must admit, there were other times when I was the one in conflict and my brother or sister would pretend to be Peace Boy or Peace Girl. And it worked just the same, but just so you know, I was the original hero, okay? Today, on the 8th day of Advent, we turn our attention to peace. Isaiah 9:6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Since the year 3600 BC, the world has only known 292 years of peace. During this period, there have been over 15,000 wars, large and small, in which almost 4 billion people have been killed. The value of property destroyed during these wars would pay for a golden belt around the world, 100 miles wide and 35 feet thick. We live in a world of violence. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says this, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Peacemakers will be called God's children. But aren't we all God's children? Well, yes, but what Jesus is saying here is something completely different. He's saying that the people who are witnessing these Christians bringing peace, they're going to call them the children of God. It's like when I used to hold my daughter Ivy when she was a baby. Okay, we'd be in a store and a stranger would stop and start talking to her because she was the cutest thing that I ever did see. And in the middle of all this, in this conversation with Ivy, they'll say, "You look like your dad." Now, I'm grateful she doesn't look like me much anymore. Also, she's extremely grateful. But as a baby, she resembled her father. And someone, a stranger, would say, "You look like dad." And Jesus is saying that peacemakers will be called children of God because they too resemble their father. There's a family resemblance. And so they're called children of God. So what's a peacemaker? People who just alleviate violence? Yes, but not only violence, conflict. Like, are you a peacemaker or are you a pot stirrer? Okay, you know the phrase, right? You picture a pot of soup, a lot of ingredients settled to the bottom, out of sight, until they're stirred. Metaphorically, a lot of issues, resentments, obligations can drop out of sight when nobody mentions them. One can stir the pot to bring the issues to the surface, sometimes innocently, often with intent. In your office, in your place of work, are you a peacemaker or a pot stirrer? One who de-escalates conflict, the other escalates conflict. In your family, are you a peacemaker or a pot stirrer? Do you enjoy seeing how people respond to other people's successes or failures? You might be a pot stirrer. Do you often bring up sensitive issues in public to gauge people's responses and then go and tell other people how they responded? Okay, that's pot stirrer 101. You see, becoming people of peace doesn't mean helping just to alleviate violence. Being a peacemaker is also about de-escalating conflict. Now, what is Jesus' strategy for becoming peacemakers? Love. In Jesus' manifesto, the Sermon on the Mount, he gives us extremely practical examples of what it looks like for us as Christians to be peacemakers. Matthew 5. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? This is probably the most scandalous thing that Jesus ever said, because it evokes revulsion in us. Our enemies, they're the bad guys, okay? We don't love them. We beat them. We overcome them. We kill them. For the first century Christians, this sense of unfairness would have been at the forefront of their mind every morning they wake up. And in case you think Jesus is teaching in the midst of this peace and harmony kind of biblical context, you're wrong. The Roman Empire ruled the world from England all the way to India. Caesar was the ruler of the world and inventor of the salad. Pax Romana was the way of the empire, which is a peace at the edge of the sword. We take your land, we take your money, we kill your leaders, and then you have peace because there's no one left to mess with us. And Israel was one of the many nations oppressed by this empire. We have records of outrageous taxation, somewhere between 70 to 90%, by corrupt bureaucratic tax collectors. The vast majority of people lived in poverty. There's a record of 30,000 Jews crucified outside of Jerusalem right before the time of Jesus as a show of force by empire. Here's what happens if you mess with Caesar. Here's what happens if you mess with the ruler of the world. So for obvious reasons, the Jews and the Romans were enemies. And for the vast majority of the Jewish people, their thought is, we should go to war with Rome. They're the enemies. And the basic logic is this: we are God's chosen people. God is on our side, and God is stronger than Caesar, we should go to war. And that's exactly what happens a few decades after Jesus. We think only a few years, perhaps even months after Matthew records his biography of Jesus in AD 66, Israel declares war on Rome, and 4 years later the war ends in brutal defeat. Rome massacres tens of thousands of Israelites. You can go to Masada still to this day, which was the last stronghold for Israel. And so in the middle of all this, Jesus, this first century Jewish rabbi, tells his followers to love their enemies. Mind blown. As a dad, I found this very difficult to communicate to my kids when they were younger. And so in books and in movies and shows, there are bad guys and there are good guys. And I remember when Dex was 5, we would cheer for the good guys. We would want them to win. And I've told him, we want to be like the good guys. The good guys aren't mean. And he says, yeah, but it's okay to be mean to the bad guys. Well, son, that's what the kingdom of this world says. But our loyalties are to a higher kingdom founded on Christ, and we're called to love our enemies. When I was a kid, I grew up knowing who the good guys were and who the bad guys were. It was obvious. He-Man, good guy. Skeletor, bad guy. Optimus Prime, good guy. Megatron, bad guy. The Goonies are good, the Fratellis are bad. Luke, good guy. Vader, bad guy. But in Star Wars, things change a bit, right? Because in The Empire Strikes Back, we find out that Darth Vader is actually Luke's father. No longer is he just some soulless, evil Sith Lord, but he's a human. He's a dad. There's goodness in him. And that was my way to help Dex understand the way of Jesus. And in Return of the Jedi, Luke refuses to use violence against his father, and he overcomes evil with good. The gospel according to Star Wars. Jesus loved, and with his last dying breath on the cross, forgives his enemies who crucified him. It is a hard thing to teach, and it is an even harder thing to live. And so, Jesus gives us some examples. Matthew 5. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, a common misconception about this teaching is that you're letting people run over you. Actually, that's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus doesn't say, let them. He's giving you a specific strategy for response. He's teaching us to go one better than let them. He's teaching, bless them. And when they're ready to fight, you're ready to love. Love your enemy is one of the most outlandish and beautiful teachings in the life of Jesus. It's a world changer. And I am convinced that this is Jesus' most scandalous and most radical teaching. It's also the most transformative. This teaching of Jesus is difficult, and it was difficult in the first century as well. Jesus says, you have heard that it was said. There, he's quoting the law. He's quoting the Old Testament. You've heard that it was said. It's back in the Bible. And let's read what Jesus is quoting here, This is the context of his teaching, Exodus 21. Verse 22, if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely. First of all, this is like the mother of all hypotheticals, is it not? If 2 random dudes are fighting and they accidentally hit a pregnant woman who then gives birth early, what? This was a thing, I guess, in the ancient world? The text continues, but there is no serious injury. The offender must be fined, whatever the woman's husband demands and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Sounds barbaric, right? But eye for eye, tooth for tooth was a massive step forward in the ancient world. This violent world was a place where capital punishment was really the only kind of punishment, okay? You cut off my hand, you die. You steal my horse, you die. You eat the dessert that I've been saving in the fridge, you die. Okay, this was the world in which the law came about. And so this eye for eye, tooth for tooth stuff was a massive step forward. It was a leap in the cause for justice. It might sound barbaric now, but just look inside ourselves. If someone punches you in the gut, what's your natural response? Punch him in the face. Our natural bend is not to get even, it's to get ahead. You punch me in the gut, I'm going to punch you in the face. This eye for eye becomes the building blocks of what we now have in our criminal justice system. In Latin, the phrase is lex talionis, okay, the law of retaliation. This is where we get the idea of the punishment must fit the crime. It comes from here. It comes from the ancient world and the ancient word. So and this is what Jesus quotes. After quoting the law, Jesus then gives 3 scenarios. Okay, we've only got time to explore one, but they're all incredible. Okay, scenario 1. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. Okay, the right cheek is a backhand. Okay, in the ancient world, you don't use your left hand in ancient Israel. Okay, back then they didn't have toilet paper, so the left hand was used for that. Okay, the backward hand on the right cheek was a slap of a master to a slave, a superior to an inferior. If you are struck on the right cheek, that person is shaming you. If someone backhands you, give him the other cheek. Give him the other side. To give the other cheek is to stand up to them, to demand that they see you as an equal, not as an inferior. When you turn the other cheek, you're affirming your value and exposing their arrogance. Now, we don't have an honor-shame culture like ancient Israel, but we do have blogs, Twitter, social media, whispers, gossip. So a slap in the ancient world put someone in their place. It put someone below you. Gossip does the same. A mean post does the same. We're shaming people made in the image of God. And so this teaching of Jesus goes well beyond avoiding physical violence. As followers of Jesus, we do not bring shame, we bring dignity. During this Advent season, may we become people of peace. And peace is not the absence of war. It is the presence of victory and the presence of restoration. The peace of God, or the shalom of God, is the power of God. So much so that the Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Romans, tells us that the God of peace will soon crush Satan underneath your feet. Okay, that's Romans 16, 19, and 20. And I know that verse by heart because of the song in the 1990s, okay? Did any 90s youth group kids grow up singing Romans 16, 19? Okay, it was a terrible song, okay? The chorus said, Romans 16, 19 says, okay, and then it continues. It says, and the God of peace will soon crush Satan. Yes, God will crush him underneath your feet. Huh. Okay, the song was bad. The words are true. God of peace will soon crush Satan. God's peace, it's not passive. The peace of God is not his passivity. It is his breaking into what is wrong in the world and making it right. And yet the irony is that in Christ's first coming, God did not come as everyone assumed he would, with guns blazing and swords swinging. He did not come as a warrior or a soldier or a king. He came as a baby. That's what this season is all about. The New Testament continues, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Jesus' peaceable kingdom, Jesus' teaching on nonviolence has raised lots of questions in Christians over the years about serving in war. We have people in our church who have served in war, and we have people who were also conscientious objectors to war. And in the 1960s, if you were a conscientious objector, if you didn't believe in violence, often they'd make you serve the most difficult and violent mental health facilities. They're like, oh, you don't use violence? Well, let's see how you do here. And back then, the orderlies would often use violence when the patients would act out in extreme ways and when the patients attacked. But these pacifists, who have now become orderlies, would instead love their patients and they wouldn't fight back. And guess what happened? Well, there were positive results on the patients. And it was astounding. These pacifists actually played a large role in transforming the policies and practices in mental health facilities. I read of one of these pacifists becoming a Mennonite pastor, and he's telling his church this story. Okay, he had given his life to the nonviolent teaching of Jesus during the war, and he was an orderly in the mental health hospital. And speaking about his experience 50 years later of why he was a conscientious objector and why he treated people the way he did, he said this, I just think that when Jesus said, love your enemies, that means we shouldn't kill them. But I could be wrong. But I could be wrong. This dude has given his life to practice this teaching so much that it cost him so much. And then he nonchalantly says, I could be wrong. You see, even the way he held his belief was nonviolent. We cannot overcome evil with evil. We overcome it with good. The only hope is to convert the energy into some form of restoration. And this is what the kingdom of God is doing in the world, converting the power over through power under love. In fact, this is what defined the church for the first 300 years of its existence. For centuries, the primary way the early Christians witnessed well was by dying well. See, one of the ways the Roman Empire tried to stamp out the movement of Jesus was to kill Christians, graphically and publicly, in hopes of dissuading people from joining this new upstart movement known then as the Way. But it backfired. They would always have these public executions, and people were given a front row seat to see how well these Christians died. They would die like Jesus, praying for those who were killing them. And people would see this and think, there's something different about that person. I want in. And the more Rome would publicly execute Christians to discourage conversion, the more people would want to convert. When Jesus died on the cross praying for his killers, this moment gives us one of the first real conversions to Jesus. You have a Roman centurion, a Roman soldier who has just been involved in killing Jesus, watching Jesus die, and in noticing how Jesus dies, the Roman soldier replies, surely this man was the Son of God. The resurrection hadn't even happened yet. He's just watching how Jesus dies, and that's powerful enough to move him to believe. After he himself committing these acts of violence. Some think that this sounds weak, and that's fine, because it's no weaker than Jesus. It takes far more strength to love our enemies than hate them. It's more complicated. It takes longer. It may cost us much more in our personal lives, but it is the way of Jesus. It is the way of shalom. It's not the way of the world, but it is the answer to the world's problems and the building blocks for God's new world. Several years ago, there was an argument, a conflict on a subway between a man and a woman. And potato chip guy steps in. Check out this video.
In other places, citizens may dress up like Batman, or a kid might save the day by taking over the wheel when a bus driver becomes incapacitated. But in New York City, we have Snack Man. That's right, Snack Man to the rescue. Man breaks up subway fight by fearlessly eating potato chips.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
A man and a woman were fighting on the subway. She said he'd been following her. Enter Snack Man.
No, you.
Had his hand up, inserted himself, continues to eat his chips.
Do not follow me. No.
He changed the context, he changed the dynamic, and he de-escalated the incident.
But Snack Man was so cool, one fan posted, "That guy for president. His potato chip plan will bring peace to the Middle East."
But it's interesting because you did it in a way that didn't escalate the situation. You know, you didn't get aggressive with either of them. What were you munching on?
I mean, I had a stack of Pringles on top of some gummy bears also.
And did you know that somebody had videotaped this?
No, I had no idea anyone was taping it until it went viral, and I kind of found out that first day because my mom actually sent me a text message saying, "Hey, Snack Man." So
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, Pringles also heard about this, and they wanted to help you continue in your heroic ways. So Pringles is actually giving you a year's supply of Pringles.
That was great.
So
Thank you very much.
That's a peacemaker, not a pot stirrer. You know who I saw there? I know most of us just saw a guy eating a bag of potato chips and breaking up a conflict, bringing peace. I saw Peace Boy. St. Francis of Assisi wrote a beautiful prayer, and we'll close with it now. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy, O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in the giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Romans 16:19 says, Romans 16:19 says, be excellent at what is good, be innocent of evil. Oh, let's be excellent at what is good, be innocent, yes, of evil, of evil. And the God of peace will soon crush Satan. Yes, God will crush him, oh, underneath your feet. And the God of peace will soon crush Satan. Yes, God